With the rise of the women's liberation movement throughout the 1960s, Gloria Steinem emerged as one of the movement's leading voices. Realizing the misrepresentation of feminism in the media and the need for journalism written by women, Steinem co-founded Ms. Magazine in 1971. The magazine was an immediate success and quickly became the mainstream voice of the feminist movement. Ms. broke the barrier of a male-written narrative of feminism in the media by becoming the first successful periodical entirely written and owned by women. Ms. took the narrative of feminism from male reporters who didn't understand the movement. As a result, Ms. had profound effects on the women's liberation movement, and the magazine shows the importance of movement-controlled media outlets. After the passage of the 19th Amendment granting women suffrage in August of 1920, the women's movement lacked a common goal. This left many female issues unaddressed, and despite the right to vote, women were still not equal under the law. Women had few reproductive rights, virtually no rights at all in regards to divorce, and in financial issues ranging from opening a bank account to obtaining a credit card, women needed a man's signature. Throughout the 1950s, there was a dramatic increase in portrayed female societal roles in the media. Commercials and TV shows such as Leave It to Beaver received mainstream attention, further perpetuating gender roles.
Whenever we cook inside, Mom always says to cook it. But whenever we cook outside, you always do it. How come?
Well, it's sort of traditional, I guess. They say a woman's place is in the home, and I suppose as long as she's in the home, she might as well be in the kitchen.
These factors, coupled with the environment of social activism occurring during the 1950s and 60s, led to the emergence of the women's liberation movement. The new movement aimed to address the issues the suffrage movement left behind, including reproductive rights and guaranteeing social equality for women through the Equal Rights Amendment. In the late 1950s, Gloria Steinem began her career as a journalist in New York City. As a young female journalist, she was mostly assigned to write for the Society pages, reporting on fashion, housekeeping, and other topics her male bosses considered of interest to women. However, these assignments frustrated Ms. Steinem as she wanted to report on news stories. Finally, in 1963, she gained national attention for her expose as an undercover Playboy bunny. While this helped her gain a reputation as a smart, witty, and articulate writer, she had trouble being taken seriously as a journalist due to her stint as a Playboy bunny. Later, while working for New York Magazine, she covered the Red Stockings abortion speakout in New York City on March 21, 1969. Referencing this assignment, Ms. Steinem stated, "That was the big click. It had transformed me, and I began to seek out everything I could find of what was then the burgeoning women's movement." As her writing became increasingly feminist and political, her work challenged the hierarchy of male-dominated journalism. This made it challenging for her to publish news stories.
I remember when I got so frustrated with an inability to publish anything much about the movement that I actually started to go out and speak.
As a result of this involvement, along with her wittiness and charismatic personality, Ms. Steinem quickly became a leading voice of the women's liberation movement. As Gloria Steinem established herself as a prominent leader of the women's liberation movement, she saw the need for a female-controlled media outlet. In 1971, 78% of newspaper journalists were men. As these male reporters did not experience the injustices women faced, they could not accurately portray the movement in the media. Furthermore, the male-dominated press did not take the movement seriously, shown through their focus on topics such as bra burning, instead of focusing on the issues the feminist movement cared about. This led to a misunderstood perspective of feminism in the general public, as the narrative of feminism was being controlled by men.
I realized as a journalist that there really was nothing for women to read that was controlled by women. And this caused me, along with a number of other women, to start Ms. Magazine.
Gloria Steinem founded Ms. Magazine as a monthly feminist periodical. the magazine broke gender norm barriers by being the first ever publication to be entirely written and owned by women. Many men predicted the magazine would not succeed, including news commentator Harry Reasoner, who stated, "I'll give it 6 months before they run out of things to say." However, when the first issue hit the newsstands in December 1971, it sold out in just over a week. The magazine was an immediate success and gained 85,000 subscriptions after the first issue. The magazine allowed feminists to write their own narrative of feminism by focusing on topics that were of importance to the women's liberation movement, such as the Equal Rights Amendment and reproductive rights. Miss was the first successful women's periodical to write their own narrative of the women's liberation movement, breaking the barrier of a male-dominated perspective of feminism in the media. Miss Magazine continued to gain momentum as a mainstream publication throughout the 1970s, and it quickly became the popular voice of the women's liberation movement. This was due to the diversity of opinions heard in the magazine. While this often led to contradicting viewpoints within the pages of the magazine, it allowed Miss to reach a wide audience of women and men. The magazine eventually reached a readership of 3 million people. Miss continued to break barriers of social norms by addressing contentious topics such as abortion, domestic abuse, and marital rights within its pages. These articles brought mainstream attention to the objectives of women's liberation, further boosting the movement. While the barriers Miss Magazine broke proved to women that they could build successful organizations, some feminists were dissatisfied with the narrative of feminism Miss presented. This led multiple groups of women to create their own publications that reflected their narrative of feminism. Peggy Orenstein, journalist for Mother Jones, wrote, "Magazines such as Working Woman, Savvy, New York Woman, and Mirabella may have poached some of the Miss terrain, but they've manipulated the message, reflecting change but not inciting it. While these new publications empowered many women, they took away from the message and prominence of Miss Magazine." Miss Magazine continued to struggle as the women's liberation movement lost prominence throughout the 1980s. From 1987 to 2001, the magazine changed owners 6 times, and Ms. never fully regained the prominence they had during the 1970s. Ms. Magazine shows the importance of social activists taking control of their own narrative in the media. The media has a tendency, when reporting on social movements, to emphasize violence and present the visual dimension as support for the chosen narrative. As professor of social sciences, Alan O'Berenson explained in her book, Social Media and Journalism. Throughout history, this has led to misrepresentation and misinterpretations of social movements. This misrepresentation in the media was prevalent during the women's liberation movement and is still prevalent in movements such as Black Lives Matter. Just as the media in the 1970s focused on feminists burning bras, the media today tends to focus on violence during Black Lives Matter protests and traffic shutdowns instead of the reason the group is protesting.
Their agenda is it's okay to go ahead and kill cops.
This is a movement that promotes the execution of police officers.
Why has the Black Lives Matter movement not been classified yet as a hate group?
Black Lives Matter has established a strong online presence where they can share news and opinions. Through social media, the group is able to write their own narrative of the Black Lives Matter movement. Peter Brinson, sociology professor, wrote, "Movement-controlled media outlets allow social movements to directly construct their own public image and to disseminate information and views to a broader public, rather than being subject to the interpretation and selection process of a mainstream media." Feminist activist Gloria Steinem founded Miss Magazine in 1971 to allow feminists to write their own narrative of the women's liberation movement. By writing and distributing their own narrative of the feminist movement, Miss Magazine broke barriers of a male-dominated perspective of feminism in the media. Miss Magazine shows the importance of movement-controlled media outlets and how they can transform the way a movement is represented in the media. Miss truly is more than a magazine. It is a movement.